Okay, so welcome to the IEO virtual seminar series, where the IMF's work with member countries intersects with the work of the IEO on ongoing or prospective evaluations. I'm Helene Poirson. I'll be your host for the next hour and 15 minutes or so. And we are recording this in Washington, D.C., and where the weather has finally warmed up a little bit, as we were discussing earlier, on January 30th. So we're in January. I want to start by wishing everyone a Happy New Year. And for those who celebrate the Lunar New Year, a very happy Lunar New Year. We just started yesterday, Year of the Snake. So before I get to formally introducing our distinguished guest today, I want to share a few reminders, especially for those of you joining for the first time. First, that the seminar is being recorded. You can find the recording on the IEO's website within 48 hours if you'd like to see it again. Second, we will have a time for general discussion after the three presentations. And we welcome at that time questions from participants in the audience or comments. And last, and actually I hear somebody whose microphone is not muted. If you could please all mute your microphones now and stay muted unless you're speaking, so we can have a good sound quality. So if the person who's speaking could mute their microphones, we appreciate it. Thank you. So I want to talk today about the economics of technology and jobs, and also how technology combined with other structural trends like population aging affects long-run growth prospects, and what policymakers can do to facilitate those transitions and to ensure that the gains from technological advances are broadly shared. So I'm going to go ahead and go to our guest speakers now. All three of them are just brilliant experts, and we're incredibly lucky to benefit from their insights today. Our first guest, who I'm just so honored to have the privilege to introduce today, is Professor Pissarides. Chris Pissarides is the Regius Professor of Economics at the London School of Economics, the Professor of European Studies at the University of Cyprus, and the co-chair of the Institute for the Future of Work in London. He specializes in the economics of labor markets, growth, and structural change, especially as they relate to market imperfections, where his work has been internationally influential. He has recently worked extensively on the employment implications of automation and AI for the future of work. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen his commentary, read his papers, and he was awarded the 2010 Nobel Prize in Economics for his work on markets with frictions. So, Chris, you don't need any introduction for this audience, but I still wanted to do it because, again, I'm really honored that you took time to come today.
Thank you very much, Lando.
Thank you. It's wonderful. Next, we are really privileged to have Professor Charles Jones. Chad is the Stanco 25 Professor of Economics at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford University. He's a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a fellow of the Econometric Society, a co-editor of Econometrica, and the author of 2 undergraduate textbooks. Chad's research centers on the causes and consequences of long-run economic growth. Most recently, his research has focused on how population and growth interact, and also on the economics of artificial intelligence, long-run growth, and existential risk. So thank you for that wonderful title, Existential Risk. I think all of us can relate to that right now. And finally, we're excited to welcome our third guest speaker, Dabla-Norris. She is the Deputy Director in the IMF's Fiscal Affairs Department, where she leads the work on the flagship report, the Fiscal Monitor, and the Sovereign Debt Network. Previously, Ira was a mission chief in the Asia Pacific Department, leading the missions for Vietnam, where she also led the work on fiscal and climate issues in the region. Since joining the IMF, she has worked on a range of advanced, emerging market, low-income countries, and published widely on a variety of topics. She's the editor of the book Debt and Entanglements. Ira's research has also been profiled regularly in leading global newspapers and magazines, including The Economist, the FT, Bloomberg, BBC, and CNN. She is a contributing member of the Global Futures Council of the World Economic Forum. And again, welcome to you, Ira, and to all three of you. So now I just want to hear from you. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and go to our first guest speaker. Chris, the floor is yours, and I understand you have some slides.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that very, very kind introduction. Well, I look forward to talking to you about technologies by which we mean artificial intelligence these days, and sharing the panel with such distinguished speakers, commentators as here, and Chad, of course, that whose work I know. I will share some slides, and I will aim to finish in 15 to 20 minutes. So if you would be patient with me until I find the sharing, and here they are. Why isn't it? It doesn't seem to allow me to go full screen. Now it has needed some warming up time. Here we are. Well, I put here automation technologies because what I'm going to say will apply to other automation technologies. But of course, nowadays AI. A few years ago, I would include, but given the time that we have, this is all we're having today. Let's see if we manage to change. Something is going. Here we go. Now, we know that any kind of technology necessitates the transition of workers from doing one set of tasks to doing another. There might also necessitate a job change. We know from our research and everything else that what I might call the role turnover, in other words, workers remaining in the same jobs but doing different things from what they were doing before, is much more common than the change of jobs. Unfortunately, both the academic writings and especially media and commentary emphasize more also how many jobs is technology going to take from us. In fact, that's misleading. I mean, technologies always take jobs from us, and not only technologies, just about everything take jobs for us and then create others. But the important thing is, how are we going to go about these transitions? You know, what new skills are we going to learn? Now, is it different this time? Well, people always say that what we're experiencing currently is always different, but there is a difference, I believe, this time, and it is that the new skills that workers need to learn to perform the new roles are quite different from what they knew before. In other words, the transition that workers have to make is probably more than what they had to make in other major technological advances, like electricity, for example. You know, workers in assembly lines didn't have to learn any new skills very much to use electrically driven assembly lines in manufacturing than what they were doing before, more manually. So that's let's leave that there. Now, unlike sorry, I knew I missed this slide, and that's the one that gives the outline. I should tell you before, so that you know, I'm going to talk first about the response of labor markets to these new technologies, and then about the quality of jobs, of the new jobs that we're going to get, and the impact on workers. I'm sorry about this. So this is slide number 2, as you can see. So let's take it from there, and then we move on to what's different, part of what's different this time. I said that one thing that was different this time is the distance we have to cover instead in terms of learning new skills. The other one is that unlike previous technologies, now we have a lot more choice on how to apply AI. Again, if you think about electricity, with electricity, I don't think we had any choice. It was very obvious what we're going to do. You know, suddenly you have this amazing new source of power, and that's what you're going to apply. But now with the AI, we can go in many different directions. And when it comes to labor, you know, we could use it to complement human labor, make it more productive, improve the quality of the job for the worker, or we could just use it to throw the worker out of work and have the machine doing it. It's entirely a choice of management, what they're going to follow. Now, what's the record that we have so far? And I should say that we're not that far advanced in the application, although a large majority of employers have seen US studies that correspond more or less to what UK employers are saying. The 80% I put there is based on surveys that we've done UK employers, but something like 80% of employers say, yes, of course, we're using AI or we're going to increase that use. But results so far on the use of AI are mixed. I said before, we could use them to complement labor or could use them to substitute. In fact, there are some poor outcomes, although I don't think that we can say that overwhelmingly employers are using the technology to replace workers, because there is worker shortage nowadays anyway. They're recruiting more and more. I put a list here of what I consider to be the poor outcomes of AI. We could discuss them later on if you like. We do have inequalities in labor markets, and they're high by sort of standards that workers or generally people expect, and they're not falling. I think they will increase more. They will more likely increase than decrease. You know, the risk is on the upside for inequality, but we'll have to wait and see that. Again, something we could take up in discussion. There are many jobs that are being created now, especially for less skilled workers, that are not good jobs, like those in the gig economy, delivery people, drivers, you know, that kind of job. And in my view, the worst of all, but it's not something we're covering now, is that we do have evidence that digital technologies are being applied in the military for political gain, for spying and all those things, which is rather unfortunate. But I just mentioned this one of the, I don't know what I would consider one of the less desirable, socially acceptable uses of AI. Now, let's switch back to labor markets. Labor markets, this is more a definition of the term resilience, that labor markets respond well to AI if they have resilience, you might call, you know, sort of how good are they to absorb the new technology, adapt their ways of doing it to it, and then continue producing more efficiently, if you like, because they have the new technology. And that's determined by the quality of their institutions that they have in the labor market, how advanced, how fast is their digital infrastructure, how good are their demographics, and I'm sure that we're going to hear more about this later on when I finish. How open are they to trade in international collaborations, which are important when it comes to AI, because it's a global technology, and there are vast economies of scale. Are there many skills available to use the new technology? Are there good training programs to adapt to whatever it is being brought into the market? There are all those questions that determine resilience. I'll show you here the top 10 countries in terms of resilience that come from the 9th Global Resilience Index that was compiled by White Shield Advisory. Should say that I'm involved in the construction of this resilience index. We launched the latest one in 2025 only last week in Davos at the World Economic Forum. And the top countries are the United States, has the most resilient labor market when it comes to AI technologies. It's the most capable country, if you like, to absorb the new technologies. Singapore comes second, and then several European countries led by Sweden, and then Korea, Canada, and Switzerland at the end. Let me tell you about the pathways that these countries have followed to resilience, given the nature of AI technologies. And we can distinguish two extreme ways of getting the resilience here. One of them focuses on workers and focuses on improving the capabilities of workers to transition to the new technologies. I said before that the main challenge, if you like, that we're facing is the transition of workers. The other one, the other pathway we could follow is to focus on corporates, entrepreneurship, venture capital investment, and go that way to adapt our economy to the new technologies. The European model, as you can imagine, as I'm sure you will know, which especially by the Scandinavians, and that's why there are at least two Scandinavians here, Finland, Sweden, but Netherlands has a Scandinavian model as well, is one that emphasizes comprehensive social safety nets during the transition, universal education access, both in school and later as lifelong learning, stable economic policies, open market policies, and all those help workers to make the transitions. On the other hand, the United States model, and I think China, although China is not up the top yet because there are many institutional structures that are not quite geared to accepting AI technologies. But the United States model is innovation driven. It prioritizes entrepreneurship, as in Silicon Valley, Massachusetts, and Washington State mainly. They are located R&D investments and technological advancement. And then Singapore is a bit of the exception in that it combines features of both, helping workers in the transition as well as emphasizing R&D. Here is one set of those choices. We could choose what pathways to follow. I don't see the United States adapting to anything that Europeans do, given your new administration. But it's possible, in fact, I hope actually, that Europe learns a little bit from the United States and gives some more emphasis to R&D and entrepreneurship, as the Draghi report has recently emphasized, which I agree entirely. Now, we do believe that we should also pay attention to how workers are reacting to these technologies in terms of well-being. And the European model is one that scores much higher on well-being because of its welfare programs and the help to workers than the US model. In that respect, I do hope US and others follow in that direction. But as I'm saying, it's not a very easy thing to do. It's quite expensive as well, actually. You need to have history in that. Now, in terms of well-being, and now I move to the second part of my presentation, which is looking at jobs and workers' attitude to those jobs. We've just completed a very long study. It took us 3.5 years, in fact, funded by the Nuffield Foundation at the Institute for the Future of Work. And it's a study where we look at conditions that improve both the well-being of workers and the productivity of workers. It's called a report on the future of work and well-being. But basically, when it comes down to well-being, it's like an ESG policy, environment, social and governance, but it pays more attention to the governance of firms and the jobs. Now, how can you do it? How can you improve governance so that workers feel better about their jobs? They get more job satisfaction and therefore work harder and they produce more. Well, modern business governance, as we have, requires better communication and more transparency to the workforce. Managers need to treat their workers as their stakeholders and talk to them frequently about what they're doing and what plans they have. Workers place a lot of importance to good social relations at work with colleagues and line managers, especially. Just go and have a break, have an informal coffee, have common lunch places at the workplace. Just because they want to know what's going on, and you hear more meetings than something that is well prepared by manager and it's a kind of mini lecture. The workers like more autonomy with role selection within their company division. And that can be justified on the basis of work that I've done some time ago on matching and quality of matching, because these new technologies are very complicated. They have many different features. And if you give the worker autonomy to select what they're doing, then you have a better chance of improving the quality of the match between the talents of the worker and the company's needs. The basis that we have asymmetric information here. Workers know their talents better than anyone. So let them choose it, give them incentives, give them rewards. Provision of training is important in these good jobs, and it's important for training to be one that the worker owns. For example, management could put different training streams on the intranet of the company and invite the workers to spend something like 2 hours a week, which comes to about 75 to 80 hours a year of working time, and to learn those new skills. And then their promotions, their rewards, depends on how well they're performing on the basis of what we've learned. The 75 hours plus is something I got from a recent study of human capital by the McKinsey Global Institute. By the way, it's a working paper that is available on open access. Government-sponsored programs have proved successful in Europe. Again, the Swedes are champions in this. Workers really love fewer and more flexible working hour arrangements. The 4-day week is increasing in popularity, something that you can find in the annual survey of the American Psychological Association, where they ask workers how their job quality can improve and their life satisfaction can improve. And they always mention flexibility mainly in hours. And 4-day week is gaining more and more popularity. And these are what you might call the features of good jobs, which improve both worker well-being and productivity. Now, this here, it looks complicated, but it's my favorite table that's come out of our long study, actually, that we asked workers, maybe about 5,000 of them, if I'm not wrong. In the last 3 years, when your company has introduced technology, has it changed your everyday work experience in any of the following ways? And the ways we listed are opportunities to learn new things, flexibility to choose your work location, opportunities to interact and communicate, all the way down to health and safety at work, volume of tasks and duties. Now, the blue bars is the percentage of workers who said, yes, and it has improved my life at work. And the red bars are the workers who say, yes, it has affected me, but it made my life at work worse. And as you can see, it's balanced. Some of the new technologies have made workers better off. Subjectively, some have made them worse off. The one that workers really like was the opportunity to learn new things, what I mentioned about autonomy and self-teaching. The flexibility to choose where they work. They love home working 1 or 2 days a week, as you won't be surprised to hear. The opportunities to interact and communicate. Those are the top ones that workers like. New ideas be floated. It's what I was saying before, it's expected, and then salary comes down the middle. The ones that they dislike is surveillance over my work. That's cameras in the office. I don't blame them. I would hate that myself. The pace of work sometimes accelerates with the new technologies. Work during unsociable hours. This, by the way, is the implication of AI and all these media that we have on our smartphones. Like you cannot relax. But people might feel like working on Saturday night or on Sunday family lunch or something, and they keep sending a message. They might say, look at this at working time, but if your phone is there on the table and you see it lighting up and you see that it's your line manager, you just don't like that. We do it in academia, maybe in a more kind of friendly way, but I'm not surprised I don't like it anyway. Okay, so that's it. Let's move on because time might be passing on. It is time. It is passing on, actually. Sorry. All right. Finally, I want to look at skills. I only have 2 or 3 slides left. People always ask, will there still be jobs to do when this amazing technology comes on? And my response is always, technology has never been a reason for ending work. However famous the economists who said it might end, which includes one of my favorite economists, of course, John Maynard Keynes. But I'm afraid he got this one wrong. We have labor shortage now, not a job shortage. You're going to hear more, I think, about that in a minute. What technology does is to restructure work, not take it away. And usually the restructuring is for the better. Just think of those coal mines, those little kids in Oliver Twist coming down chimneys, wrapped in blankets to clean them. I know those are extreme examples, but they existed. Think of manufacturing. Is in the service sector better? Let machines do this boring manual works in manufacturing. Once you have the right institutional structures, once you have a resilient labor market, then jobs will be created if there are people who want to do them. So you should not be asking where are the jobs going to come from, but you should be asking what skills will I need to work effectively with the new technology. and some US evidence that comes from the Manpower Group and again from McKinsey Global Institute, independently, of course, and the work that we did in the UK using millions of job vacancy data from Adzuna, the online, the company that collects online job advertising. They suggest that the following are the technical skills that will need to grow, that are going to grow in demand. If you want to go the technical way, these are the skills you need to learn. IT skills of all kinds. Number one in the UK, actually, to my surprise, is how to work effectively with Amazon, with Amazon Web Services. I say surprising because I didn't expect Amazon to be top of the list for companies to use in the UK, but that's what's coming out. And data processing, of course, of all kinds. Then operations and logistics are very important. The communication costs, logistic costs have really fallen. So companies want to use them more and more and become global. And of course, engineers to tell us how to use the new technology. But many more jobs than those are requesting what you might call soft skills. I put in quotation marks because I don't like it, but this is what everyone is calling them. These skills are good communication with supervisor, peers, subordinates, and customers, reliability and self-discipline at work, creativity, critical thinking, so that you can get your autonomy and use it, leadership and managing others, advanced communication and negotiation skills, and building up a good customer base. About 80% of job advertising in the UK mention these skills. About 40% mention the high-tech ones that I showed you before. Last slide, I promise you, it's understandable what's going on in the markets with AI. Data analytics and engineering are essential because this is how AI works. But once you have the data, once you have the analysis from your high-tech people and you do your research, you need to communicate the results and you need to build and maintain your customer base. A lot of AI applications are aimed at improving market efficiency, how to reach the customer faster and in a more targeted way so that you get more customer value, more value out of the customers, if you like, not just how to cut production costs. This opens an entirely new chapter that I do agree that maybe AI will improve our productivity, but the improvement is going to come from what you see there in the bottom slide, much more than what will come from, say, ChatGPT preparing a report in 5 minutes when you need 5 days from a human. That would improve productivity, but there are so many efficiencies in marketing, whatever you are producing, that AI can just get rid of them. That's much better. It's the last but one slide. Here is the last one. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to hearing my colleagues on the panel.
Thank you. And yeah, I see some applause, and absolutely. Thank you so much, Chris, for this very clear, informative presentation. I really was struck by the first statistic you mentioned, which is 80% of UK companies have now integrated these new technologies into their operations. So it's really, it's everybody's doing it essentially. And also that.
Yes, I was surprised by that too, actually.
It's striking.
Probably as yet rather simple applications, but they're coming, the more complicated are coming. Yeah.
Right. And that's just 2 years, barely 2 years since ChatGPT was launched. The amount of training also is another striking statistic. 75 hours, according to McKinsey study, right, is the optimal amount of training per year. That's a lot of hours
plus.
just to keep up, right? Yeah. So okay, so we are holding the questions and comments for at the end for the general discussion. But if you're in the audience, if you're afraid of forgetting them, feel free to put them in the chat, and then we'll go right into that. But for now, I'm going to turn to our second speaker. So Chad, over to you.
Great, thanks very much. So what I'd like to talk about is artificial intelligence and economic growth. I'll highlight some implications for long-run growth. I'll talk a little bit about the share of GDP paid to labor versus capital, and maybe one slide on the labor market. And then, as Helene mentioned, some thoughts about what are the risks associated with AI and what should we do about it. A bunch of papers that this talk draws on. So let me highlight two starting points based on some work I did with Philippe and Aguillon and Ben Jones. The first starting point is to recognize that it might be helpful to view AI as just the latest form of a kind of automation that's been going on for hundreds of years, right? So the textile mill, the steam engine, these are forms of automation. AI is kind of the latest form of automation. And what's useful about that is it allows us to use historical evidence or the past to help tell us something about what the future might look like. So automation in general, by that phrase, I'm meaning replacing labor in particular tasks with machines and algorithms. So as I mentioned, textile looms, steam engines, electric power computers are all examples of automation in the past. The future looks like driverless cars, paralegals, pathologists, maybe researchers, maybe everyone. Those are the kind of questions that are on the table. So viewing AI as a continuation of automation that's been going on for hundreds of years. The second starting point is that AI may be limited by bottlenecks, and we like to think of those bottlenecks as Baumol's cost disease. So remember Baumol's basic point applied to AI here. I think it's, our economic growth and our productivity, our advances are constrained not by what we do well, but rather by what's essential and yet hard to improve. And you'll see some examples of that in a second. Computers can get very, very cheap, and they have over the last 50 years, and that makes us more productive. And yet my ability to click on a website, or my ability to read a paper, or my ability to interpret a regression, that doesn't change with the computer. So the computer makes us really good at some things, but that just means the constraints, the bottlenecks that exist in the system just become much more important. So the way we think of that in the model is we think of tasks as being complements rather than substitutes. So the elasticity of substitution across a bunch of tasks might be less than one. And initially, all the tasks are done with labor. This goes back to Zaira and Acemoglu and Restrepo. Initially, all the tasks are done with labor. And what automation is it's learning how to use capital instead of labor to perform those tasks. So it's sort of about increasing the number of things you can do with capital. And so if you want to think about what happens to labor share, it's interesting that there are kind of two forces going on here. On the one hand, there's the increasing set of tasks you can do with capital, this automation. That tends to raise the capital share and lower the labor share. And that's where some of the worry about, is automation going to lower the labor share, comes from. On the other hand, if you get better computers, if your computers get better and better and better, and we see enormous algorithmic improvements in AI, by the way, the cost of doing these computations is falling by a factor of 10 because of Moore's law and algorithmic improvements. Well, better computers, better algorithms actually lowers the capital share and raises the labor share. And the intriguing thing is it's possible for these to balance. And so one way to think about this, imagine a world where, maybe 50 years ago, we were doing 20% of tasks with capital. Maybe, today we're doing 30% of tasks with capital, but maybe in the future, when AI, if it's really, really impressive, maybe 99% of the tasks are going to be done with capital. And you might worry, according to that sort of first bullet point, maybe that's going to reduce the labor share a lot. Actually, that tends not to be what happens. In fact, because that leads to the accumulation of more capital, you get more and more capital, you get better computers, you get faster computers, and the cheap, plentiful, fast computers with an elasticity of substitution less than 1 means that the capital share falls rather than rises, and labor share remains high. So it doesn't absolutely have to work this way, but there's a strong tendency in these models for the labor share to want to rise and for the capital share to want to fall. And maybe automation and faster computers can offset, but it's not at all obvious that the labor share has to decline in the long run. So that's one of the things that comes out of these models, and it's really driven by the bottleneck. So labor used to do 80% of tasks, then 70%, then 60%. Now we're only doing 1% of the tasks, but all the other tasks are the things where computers are doing it. They're incredibly good. They're incredibly fast. The price of computers falls like crazy. The value of the capital, and so it's the scarce factor with the elasticity of substitution less than one. It's the scarce factor that gets the share. And so so that's an interesting possibility. Okay, the next thing I want to turn to, so what I talked about so far is kind of automation in producing, manufacturing and producing agriculture and producing other things. An intriguing possibility is that automation may apply to the production of ideas as well. So we kind of know from 75 years of growth theory that economic growth comes from people producing ideas, right? We discover new and better ways to do things, and that's where growth comes from. And historically, we've been constrained by the fact that it's people producing ideas. You can make the people smarter. People can get PhDs instead of college degrees. But fundamentally, the number of smart, talented people you have working to produce ideas is kind of a key constraint on growth. Well, what if AI can do some of those tasks for us? If you think about how we produce economics research, it used to be we had to run regressions inverting matrices by hand, and then we had computers to help us out. It used to be when I was a graduate student, you had to get physical copies of papers, and it was really rare. If I had the Mortensen Pissarides paper, I had a hard copy of that when in its working paper form. That was just an incredibly valuable thing to have because you could only get it by copying it from someone else. Whereas, of course, now you have access to the world of knowledge at the click of a button. And so we've already been automating things having to do with producing ideas. I'll come back to that point in a second because I think it has interesting implications. But more generally, you can imagine, what if AI learns to help us produce ideas, right? And you see this with AlphaFold. You see this with the materials version of AlphaFold, discovering new materials. So think about the pharmaceutical we can discover. And so the automation of the production of ideas, where it's no longer necessarily constrained by people, that can give us more ideas and therefore higher productivity. And I think, AlphaFold's a good example of that. It's already clear these proteins that used to take a PhD student a full year to figure out their shape in the protein folding. Now we have all of them solved, basically, thanks to Demis Hassabis and DeepMind and company. So I think it's very likely that this kind of continuation of the automation of tasks and producing ideas is going to raise productivity substantially in the coming years. Interestingly, to get the growth rate to speed up kind of in a sustained way, you need the rate of automation to speed up as well. And that also seems like it's happening. I mean, I think what OpenAI and Anthropic and Google and the other companies are doing, it does look like the rate of automation could speed up. And so that actually could speed up growth in some way. There's also an extreme version of this, which is sort of science fiction-y, but interesting to think about. Imagine AI can automate every task that a researcher does. Well, if all tasks are automated, then you're no longer constrained by people. Capital produces ideas, and capital gives you more ideas gives you more capital gives you more ideas. There's sort of a virtuous circle here. And because growth models are characterized by increasing returns from the non-rivalry of ideas, sort of Paul Romer's insight, that virtuous circle explodes. And it's very easy to write down models where if machines can produce ideas, then it's possible growth explodes. So this notion that growth could speed up, I think, is in some ways surprisingly to me. I'm maybe one of the more pessimistic people about our ability to speed up growth. It can actually happen. So what would it look like? What would AI accelerating economic growth look like? I think it's helpful, rather than these speculative things, to just say, okay, what might the next decade look like if AI starts to fulfill the promises that we're seeing? And I think to start with, you'd see near-term productivity boosts, and maybe especially in the software sector. This we're already seeing. If you do any coding at all, it's just incredibly helpful to have ChatGPT help you out, or Cursor AI, or these other tools. And software engineers already claim that they see probably 25%, the number I'm citing here is actually an underestimate. 25, 30, 40, 50% improvements. I wanted O1's ChatGPT's O1 model to check one of my papers, and I told it, here's my paper. I write all my code in MATLAB. I said, give me a Python program to check all the numbers in the paper, and it spits it out. I don't even know how to use Python. I just run it, and it checks whether my numbers are right or not. Okay, so in the next decade, it's very possible. I think if you look at Dario Amodei or Sam Altman, they think it's going to happen in the next 2 years that AI agents could automate most coding. Maybe AI is going to be good enough. You just ask it to write this program, like I ask it to write the Python program to check my paper, and it spits it out. Over the next decade, it's not implausible that happens. What if that does happen? Well, then you ask the AI, you say, hey, can you write better code, make the AI even better? And it works on improving itself, and you get even better AI agents. Eventually, you get virtual research assistants that could automate lots of cognitive work. And one way to think about that I found really helpful is think about remote work now. We have a lot of work in modern advanced economies, especially in the service sector, that can be done remotely. You do it over Zoom. People stay at home. Remote work is great. Cognitive tasks that can be done remotely. Well, imagine you had access to a virtual AI assistant that you interact with over Zoom. And it's a great coder, and it can think about things really well. And you ask it to do things, right? Well, again, after we've got this self-improving AI coding better AI assistants, that's a useful tool in some sense. You ask it to invent new ideas. You ask it to invent better computer chip designs. You ask it to help design better robots and to simulate them in virtual space to come up with better designs. You ask it to help with medical technologies. You ask it to help us engineer robots to make them able to do physical tasks. And then you have better robots that can be run by AI, and then you could automate physical work as well as virtual work. So it's not that any of these steps necessarily has to happen, but I find it helpful to think about, especially the early steps seem like they're already happening. And what's the thing that prevents the later steps from happening? Not so clear. But so when I look at this story, it seems to be it's totally plausible that productivity gets raised substantially over the next 2 decades as we start automating software, then lots of cognitive tasks, and then we ask the AI to help us build robots to help automate physical tasks and invent lots of ideas. So this strikes me as plausible. That said, I mentioned I'm one of the most pessimistic growth economists about our ability to raise growth rates, and that pessimism comes from a graph like this. So this is income per person in the United States over the last 150 years. And you can see on a log scale, it looks like a straight line, right? Growth over the last 150 years has been 2% plus or minus a little bit, but over the very long term, we haven't departed very far from a straight line with a slope of 2%. Notice, by the way, that automation has been going on throughout this entire process, right? The discovery of electricity, the discovery of the internal combustion engine, the discovery of the transistor, the discovery of the laser, the microwave, radar, GPS, the internet, right? Transistors, semiconductors, faster computer chips, Moore's law, all of that stuff was here. And yet, that's what gave us 2% growth. And so to sort of highlight the pessimistic case, I think it's helpful to think about these bottlenecks and Baumol effects. Again, the fact that despite all these amazing automating, incredible inventions, growth has been 2% per year. Well, maybe those great ideas are what kept economic growth from slowing. Okay, so kind of the most pessimistic view, which I think is kind of not my view, but it's a useful view to keep in mind, is that if you don't get another amazing idea, maybe this is the general purpose technology view of economic history. You get these waves, electricity, the steam engine, semiconductors, you get these waves. And if you don't get the next wave, growth comes to an end. Well, in that view, perhaps AI is the latest great general purpose technology that's going to let us maintain our 2% growth for a little while longer. Again, I kind of think I'm actually more in the camp that it's going to have bigger effects than this. But I think if you look at economic history, that's a very useful perspective to keep in mind. The other perspective from economic history, of course, is that electricity and computers, so sort of the Paul David, Eric Brynjolfsson, a bunch of people have made this point over time, electricity, computers took 50 years to really have their full impact. There were all these complementary innovations. You had to redesign factories. You had to integrate computers into your organization. And so the change occurs much more gradually than we think historically. And I suspect that's true for AI as well. Do I think the world's going to change in the next 5 years? Well, no, there are all these things where AI has its effects gradually, but do I think over the next 50 years? I'm sorry, there's someone's microphone. I'll keep going, but stop me if I'm supposed to stop. Okay. So I think the long run impact of AI could still be quite dramatic. Okay. Yeah, I have one slide on jobs and a couple of slides on existential risk. So I feel bashful talking about jobs with Chris Pissarides here, but let me at least say the one thing that I think pops out of these models that I've played with. So the world where AI changes everything. So the optimistic world, the optimistic view of things, is a world where GDP is incredibly high. The size of the pie available for redistribution is enormous, and somehow I have the sense we'll figure out how to solve hard problems if the size of the pie is enormous. It's not to say the transition can't be hard. Also, I think what happens in developing countries, I think, is a really big question. So, if the US and Europe get rich because they're the ones inventing the AI technologies, then their pie is high and they can redistribute. Are they going to be willing to redistribute to other countries? That's, I think, an important understudied issue. Second point, as we get richer, we naturally work less. Leisure is a good thing. In our models, work is a bad thing. Work is a bad, and you kind of don't want to do it. That's why they have to pay you to do it. And so rising leisure, that's actually a good thing. So to the extent that AI makes us rich and we all take lots more leisure, that's part of the good world. On the other hand, there is good, meaningful work. I don't see my work as the bad kind of work that I did growing up on a farm. That was bad work. Sitting in my office is the good work. So maybe there's going to be good work that we do that involves people and experiences. So even if AI could automate everything, think about chess. My iPhone can beat Magnus Carlsen at chess, but chess is more popular than it's ever been. And so we may value experiences involving people, and because of these Belmont effects, that can keep the labor share very high. So I think that's an important thing to appreciate. Okay, last 2 minutes. Let me talk about AI and existential risk. So if you listen to what the world's experts on AI are saying, so Jeff Hinton and Demis Hassabis, who won the Nobel Prize, or Sam Altman or Dario Amodei, all the leaders of these top labs, disproportionately, 80% of them say things like AI could be more impressive than electricity, but more dangerous than nuclear weapons. So they do worry about these downside risks. And I wrote 2 short papers about this. So the first short paper was what I think of as the Oppenheimer question. You remember Oppenheimer when we were designing nuclear bombs the first time, the Trinity Project, before they flip the switch to test it, the physicists say, hey, what's the chance this ignites the atmosphere and kills everyone? And the physicists go away and do the calculations and come back and say, well, it's pretty small. Well, how small does it have to be before we don't want to do it, right? And so I'm going to think about the same thing in terms of AI. So imagine if nothing goes wrong, think about the most optimistic scenario, AI accelerates growth to 10% per year. That seems pretty unlikely to me, but let's give it the benefit of the doubt. But in exchange for that amazing economic possibility, there's a one-time small chance that AI kills everyone. It's like the atomic bomb igniting the atmosphere. Do you want to use it or not? What risk are you willing to take? And so I sort of did some calculations in our standard economic models to figure out what our standard economic models say about this question. And broadly speaking, there are two findings. First, with high living standards and diminishing returns, you kind of only take small risks. And that was exactly what I thought would happen. So yeah, I don't want them testing the atomic bomb if there's a chance it ignites the atmosphere. But the surprising thing is, in a world where AI can deliver 10% growth, it's probably also going to cure cancer and cure heart disease and reduce mortality and help us live longer. If you add that to the model, actually you're willing to take large risks. And the reason is that, mortality and existential risk are all in the same units. You're comparing lives to lives, not lives to consumption. As we get rich with diminishing returns to consumption, yeah, I don't need more consumption. I don't need 2 more iPhones. I need more days of life to enjoy my good life at Stanford. But if AI can help me cut my mortality rate in half, well, then I'm willing to take serious existential risks to achieve that. The last thing I want to say this: how much should we spend to reduce these catastrophic risks? I found it helpful to realize in the COVID pandemic, we faced a mortality risk of 0.3%. We spent 4% of GDP by shutting down our economies. People voluntarily stopped going to work and stuff. We spent 4% of GDP to mitigate a mortality risk of 0.3%. 4% of GDP is a huge amount. That's more than $1 trillion in the US, right? Well, AI risk seems to be kind of on this order of magnitude, maybe even larger. And that kind of suggests, even from a selfish standpoint, forget future generations, just from a selfish standpoint, maybe we are massively underinvesting in mitigating this risk. So the last thing I'll say, I want to highlight these externalities and race dynamics. The AI labs do not internalize the existential risk to all of us. Or, what if it creates, I'll answer the question. But so I think a policy implication is maybe we should think about taxing GPUs, these computer chips, and use the revenue to subsidize safety, to reduce the military risks, to reduce the risks of bad actors getting a hold of an oracle and doing bad things with it. Okay, let me stop there.
Fascinating, Chad. Thank you so much. I have so many comments and questions, but we are running a little bit behind schedule. So over to you, Ira. And this is actually a perfect transition because Ira is going to tackle the easy part, which is what should policymakers do with their fiscal tools.
Thanks so much. Amy, you're going to help me put this up. Thanks so much. So it's really, thank you, Helene, for inviting me. And it's really an honor to be in this session presenting alongside Chris and Chad. And they both emphasize how AI holds the potential to massively boost living standards and to advance our societies. And from where I stand, which is the Fiscal Affairs Department of the IMF, it could completely revolutionize public sector operations, think tax collections, and providing services such as education, health. But the speed at which AI, in particular generative AI, is achieving and in some cases even surpassing human cognition is also pretty extraordinary. And it raises a host of concerns. And some of these concerns my fellow presenters have already talked about. In my talk, I'm going to focus on labor market disruptions and rising inequality and the role that fiscal policy can play, in particular, in helping mitigate these risks. So next slide, please. So very quickly, in terms of the roadmap of my presentation, I'm going to speak very briefly on the benefits and risks. We've talked at some length about this. And I just want to emphasize here that both of these are very uncertain at this juncture. The real question is, are policymakers or are governments prepared to cope with the business as usual scenarios, which is the relatively benign outcomes, if you will? So nothing bad happens or nothing too bad happens and we all benefit. And are they also prepared to deal with the more disruptive, more painful transitions? And in particular, I'm interested in asking this question: are tax and social protection systems fit for purpose in a world with potentially more disruptive labor market transitions? And I'm going to end with some takeaways. So next slide, please. So as Chad pointed out, the impact of AI on the economy or the future impact remains really uncertain. And there's a lot of uncertainty around its evolution, whether it's just automation, whether it's going to add to ideas and innovation, when the major benefits and when the major risks will materialize. When you just look at the literature, and you can see the left-hand side figure, it shows that estimates sort of all over the place. So for the next 10 years, it could range from higher GDP of just about 1%, as suggested by Daron Acemoglu, to more than 20% by some other estimates. So wide range of potential GDP impacts. But alongside the productivity impacts, there are also questions about how disruptive it could be for labor markets. And this is something that Chris spoke to at length. A recent IMF study by some colleagues of mine at the research department shows that almost 40% of global employment could be exposed to AI. And this is the red and coral bars in the chart on the right. Now, historically, automation information technologies have tended to replace or impact routine tasks. But one of the things that potentially sets AI apart is that it could also impact more skilled workers, or those workers who perform more sort of high-skilled tasks. And so by that token, advanced economies as a whole face greater risks on the one hand. So this is vulnerability to potential displacement by automation. But at the same time, they also face greater opportunities to leverage the benefits, because workers tend to perform tasks that are complementary to this technology, compared to, say, an emerging market and other developing economies. Now, of course, vulnerability to being displaced by this technology doesn't tantamount to displacement. And complementarity doesn't necessarily mean that all workers will benefit, something that Chris also spoke about. But the bottom line is that workers could be impacted. Next slide, please. And so since the title of this entire session was on existential risks, I wanted to look into this issue of existential risks and what are people saying about this. A critical distinction between AI, in particular generative AI, and past disruptive technologies such as steam engines, electricity, early computers, lies in its potential for really rapid or fast diffusion and quick adoption. And so it is this sheer scale and speed of the transformation that also could pose existential risks. And so when you look at when you construct a measure of existential risk from news media, we show that mentions of existential risk have surged in recent years. And this is really driven in large part by concerns about AI development, as seen in the right-hand side figure, even in comparison to other existential risks such as climate change. So this is something that is on people's mind. Next slide, please. And much of these concerns are actually not necessarily driven by sort of this doomsday scenario of where sort of AI leads to the destruction of humanity, but by concerns of job loss and anxiety across countries and how specific sectors could be impacted. And so here, to capture this sentiment, we constructed a newspaper-based index that reflects the share of articles on AI, discussing risks and threats of job loss from a large set of newspapers. And you see that these concerns have increased significantly since 2023. This is with the advent of ChatGPT and such. Although, as both Chad and Chris have mentioned, automation is not necessarily a new phenomenon. It's just sort of the new developments that have really spurred some of this anxiety. So next slide, please. So if we think about the potential for labor market disruptions and the fact that these could be painful, then a natural question is, are we thinking about the measures that are potentially needed to help workers cope with the adverse impact of these technologies? And in particular, are tax and social protection systems fit for purpose in this brave new world? And in order to fix these ideas, all these things that we've been talking about, I'm going to turn to a model-based analysis. Next slide, please. So in my paper with my co-authors Anne Nguyen and Daniel Garcia Macia of the IMF, what we did is we extended a Hank DSGE model, and this has labor market frictions And the model features two production sectors, and there's a potential for automation. So here we're not looking at sort of this invention of new ideas, as Chad mentioned, but really it's just a model of automation. And I'm going to very briefly describe the model setup, just so to fix the ideas. And each sector in this model uses traditional capital, automated capital, labor. Automated capital can substitute for labor, and so this kind of a setup allows for sectoral mobility. And we model unemployment explicitly. There's some sort of search and matching frictions of the kind that Chris spoke of. And so the model here we have heterogeneity. There's workers, firm owners, employed workers, and unemployed workers. And workers cannot fully insure against the income risk that comes from unemployment. And so you have precautionary savings. The other features of the model are standard, but what we do is we introduce different fiscal instruments in this kind of a setup. Next slide, please. So we calibrate this model to sort of a representative advanced economy. And what we do is we simulate a sizable acceleration in the productivity of automated capital in one sector. Okay? And so this shock leads to a reduction in labor demand in the affected sector. And this can be seen in the left-hand side figure. There's a 20% decline in employment in the new steady state. And because this technology is on the whole beneficial for society, we see that productivity is boosted, and this kind of raises wages, and it increases the consumption of unemployed workers as in the new steady state. But at the same time, unemployment rises temporarily because of reallocation costs across sectors. Workers may not necessarily have the right skills for the new jobs or the new tasks that are created. So one can think of that. And it's this excess unemployment that puts downward pressure on income and consumption of the unemployed. And you have incomplete insurance. So this kind of precautionary saving amplifies the fall in consumption. And it's these transitional challenges that create a role for fiscal policy. Next slide, please. So given that this transition could be potentially costly and disruptive for workers, this has led in some quarters to proposals to tax AI. So some sort of a robot or an automation tax. And we consider this, and we ask this question, well, should we have some sort of is there a rationale for having some sort of a tax on automation? Now, a natural starting point when we think about this is Diamond-Murley's, the principle that the tax system should not distort firms' production decisions, that, in other words, maintaining production efficiency. The question we asked is there a rationale from deviating from Diamond-Murley's? And so here what we do is we study whether we should tax the returns from automated capital as an alternative to, say, labor income taxation to fund social spending. So we know that some sort of social spending is going to be needed to alleviate the impact on workers that are temporarily laid off. So the question is, should we tax capital as compared to labor income in order to finance the spending? And this figure here shows the change in the economic impacts of taxing automated capital relative to taxing labor for different levels of the transition cost in each bubble. And the bigger the bubble, the larger the size of the transition costs. So an automation tax, what it does is it just increases the cost of using automated capital, and that discourages firms from replacing labor with capital, and this reduces the unemployment spikes, but it comes at a cost, and then the cost is lower wages. And so overall, the larger the labor costs or the labor market disruption, the stronger the rationale or the argument for taxing AI. On two grounds. First, from a purely efficiency motive, it can improve social welfare by internalizing labor market impacts and any potential credit market failures that may be present, frictions that may be present. But there's also an equity motive. It can allow for a redistribution of income from capital owners to workers. Now, that's fine in theory, but in practice, implementing some sort of an AI tax can be very challenging. The natural question is, what is the tax base? It's very hard to even determine in the data how much AI is embodied in capital assets. And so it'd be very challenging to do this. So we don't see a special need for a tax on AI. Next slide, please. But that doesn't necessarily mean that countries can do nothing. I mean, our recently published paper shows that the tax systems of several countries, including the US, Germany, among others, they tend to favor automation. That is, the marginal effective tax rate on computer software and hardware that has been shown to be labor substituting is the marginal effective tax rates on these types of items or assets are much lower than on other types of assets that tend to complement labor. So what that means is that perhaps countries could carefully think about or the mix of depreciation allowances and tax credits and tax exemptions they may be granting to firms to correct any biases that may be making AI special and excessively encouraging labor substituting investments. Next slide, please. 2 points that were also raised by Chad is that AI could potentially aggravate inequality. Not entirely clear which way it could fall, but the point is that given the winner-takes-all dynamics associated with this technology, profits from AI could conceivably, during the transition, be concentrated in a few firms. And as we already know, capital income is already more concentrated at the top of the income distribution compared to labor income, and even more so for the highest earners. So that is one concern. The equity aspect is clearly a concern. Another concern is that perhaps development in AI could lead to a further erosion of the income tax base. So on the right-hand side figure, we're plotting the average tax rate on capital income in advanced economies and the average tax rate on labor income. And what you can see is that there's been sort of a secular trend decline in the average tax share of capital income since the early 1980s. So consider a scenario in which AI further reduces the labor income share, at least in the next, say, 5 or 10 years. Then, governments will have to ask themselves, well, will there need to be greater scope for capital income taxation to not just sustain the existing level of public revenues, but also to pay for the transition costs of AI? Next slide, please.
Ira, so sorry to jump in. It's just I'm watching the clock. Sorry, I know you were squeezed being the third presentation. Is just to leave 5 minutes maybe for questions?
Sure. So I'm just going to
jump to conclusions. Yeah, I really apologize, but
no, that's. But let me just quickly turn to the next slide, just very quickly, and then I'm going to conclude. So something that Chris has also talked about is the importance of sort of thinking about social protection systems and skills policy. So here, what we try to do is we did an exercise where we looked at a combination of a temporary unemployment, temporary but generous unemployment benefits that are provided in a way that are sort of aligned with the unemployment level in the country, in combination with skills policies, say active labor market policies for upskilling and reskilling workers. This is shown in the dashed line in the 2 figures, and we show that this can more effectively reduce the surge in unemployment and can help mitigate the consumption loss of unemployed workers, because it gives workers more time to find jobs, and so it can improve matching. Now, in reality, what we see is that there is considerable scope in all countries, not just in emerging market and developing countries, but also in advanced economies, to improve the generosity, the coverage of unemployment benefit systems, to tweak the design of social protection systems, and to sort of rethink what kinds of skills and training policies will be needed in this world of AI. So in the interest of time, I'm going to end here, but the point that I just wanted to make is that it's quite uncertain what the impacts will be and how large and how benign and how disruptive. But the important thing is for governments to be prepared to really think about whether their tax systems will stand up to this technology, whether their social protection systems need to be tweaked, whether fundamental skills policies, whether their education systems need to be rethought in a world of AI. So let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hira. I definitely pick up a theme of also resilience of the system, as Chris Pissarides had in his presentation. So let's try. We have 5 minutes or so. Let's try to have at least a couple questions. If anyone in the audience would like to unmute and just come in. Yeah. Yes, Lamine.
Thanks, Helene. So this question is for Hera. Hera, nice presentation, and I think I came a little late, so maybe the question I'm going to ask. When you look at all these global transitions like AI, climate, you name it, there's a lot of work done on themselves, right? But quite often we don't explore the interactions between these multiple global transitions. So in that context, does your work or did your work ever look at the interactions between climate and AI? Because there are some people out there who think that maybe AI could be, because of the technology, could actually help us towards the transition to net zero. So any work that you might have done. I know ICD did something, but from where you're standing.
Fantastic. Yeah, great question, Lamine. So in the interest of time, Martin, I saw your hand up. Why don't you ask your question, and then we'll ask each of the panelists if they want to say a few thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for this amazing panel. Really fantastic. I have a question. Some of you touched on this, on where we see developing countries in this AI transition, there's a sense that labor markets specifically are less at risk, they're less exposed. But I think if we take a step back in terms of the development prospects, where does it leave developing countries? Now, traditionally, it used to be enter the value chains at low cost, low skilled jobs. But maybe AI and robots will do that better and cheaper. So where do you see development prospects? And then maybe following up on that in terms of policy, some of you have mentioned improving social safety nets. Should we think about social safety nets at a global scale? If developing countries potentially are permanently left behind, should we think about global transfer mechanisms? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Fantastic question. So I'll let the panelists come in as they would like.
Maybe very quickly on Lamine's question. I think that's a good question, Lamine, in terms of thinking about sort of all the challenges that could be faced. In our work, we really just wanted to sort of say, okay, the productivity benefits could be massive. The point is that so long as a transition is really costly, and it could be costly for some workers, it could be costly for potentially a large number of workers, then do governments have the right policies in place to alleviate those welfare losses? I think that was really the purpose of what we did. But one could conceivably think about sort of other ways of looking at these issues and other challenges that countries face, and then ask, do you actually have the fiscal space? And this issue of are your revenues sufficient to meet all these spending needs that are required? I think that's a legitimate question to ask. On emerging markets, I'll let Chad and Chris come in as well. Very briefly on our side, I mean, when you think about sort of labor markets, so you have much less unemployment protection that is provided, weaker coverage, you have informal sectors. So social protection systems are much weaker. Workers on the whole in emerging market and developing economies are less prepared, but they also have less equipped with the skills that are required in this new economy. So the challenges, I think, are manifold, and the policy implications are very different. I mean, you need like foundational infrastructure, foundational skills in order to be able to even adopt these technologies. And I think there are important questions in terms of how can these countries benefit from sort of these concentrated gains that could accrue to advanced economies. Let me stop here and turn. Maybe Chad and Chris would like to come in.
Should I come quickly on AI and climate change? AI could make a lot of difference actually on climate change. I mean, just think of agriculture, how much waste of water there is, for example. Whereas with drones with AI could identify dry areas, you could just target your water in. And then many other, you could even predict natural disasters from what I was reading recently. Could make enormous. Now, there is an aspect, however, it quite struck me when I heard it very recently. There is an aspect to AI which goes against without us realizing. You know, for example, if you try to search, if you try to use GPT to search something instead of asking Google, say, you know, what's this? The resource cost that you're doing with ChatGPT is much more than Google. And there's more and more people. I mean, I say it myself. You know, we all use Google all the time. There's a question there is in the world, we don't know what it is. You put it on Google. Now more and more people are doing it on ChatGPT. You know, they say, "Oh, why don't you use ChatGPT? We'll give you so much better answer." And suddenly you find yourself consuming fossil fuels much more than before, which goes against. So it's a very complicated question, but we do need to have it. I mean, to the credit of the previous UK government, which it has, I should say, hasn't really achieved very much, but it has set up an institute for AI safety, which includes these things. Actually, now, in the current government is promoting it more and is putting more resources into it. That was the result of the first AI safety conference that they had in London that Rishi Sunak had with his famous conversation with Elon Musk. And he wasn't invited this time, and he got very upset, and he started saying bad things about the UK. Anyway, developing countries, that's a problem that's been bothering me a lot, in fact, because I work a lot on China, and I see the Chinese development model. It's not available to Africa or even India, in fact, now. I think the only way they can go is to embrace new technology, is to find niche services or products that they can do with the new technologies and do them. And I think some African countries are already doing it. I was listening to something we were hearing about Kenya using a lot more technology than you would expect given their level of development. I mean, manufacturing, we're always going to want to produce manufacturing, but this, I think Helene very correctly said, low-cost manufacturing is no longer a reason for supply chains and location of multinationals that will help push up growth the way they did it with China in the 1990s. News is not very good, though, unless the richer countries, high-income countries, start giving more help and more targeted help to less advanced countries.
Thank you. Chad, you want to have a word on the growth aspect, the convergence maybe of developing countries, or
I'll be very fast because I took more than my share of time already. I think the developing country point is really important, and I don't have any deep thoughts about it. I think the one thing I would say is that, you know, AI is automating intelligence, and intelligence turns out to be easy relative to, you know, manual tasks that are not routine. And so I think that does give developing countries some time to figure it out. So I think the high skilled, you know, cognitive work is going to be the thing that gets automated first, actually. And so maybe that gives us time, but it's far from obvious how we solve this problem, and it's going to be very important.
Yep, your ERAS presentation had a chart on that based on the work of our IMF colleagues in research department. So we started a little bit late, so I think it's okay to close a little bit late. I want to thank everyone for listening to this seminar. I truly appreciate the insights that we heard today from our experts, the insights you leave us with and your questions. So have a really beautiful day, and we'll see you soon. So bye for now. And
bye, thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. I wanted to close the recording.